Stop the cameras. Doctor, Phil's voice froze the entire studio when the grandmother whispered the truth nobody was prepared to hear. And it wasn't the kind of whisper that comes from fear, but from a lifetime of carrying a secret so heavy that it reshaped every memory, every holiday, every birthday, every smile that was ever shared in that family. And the young woman sitting next to her didn't even realize that her entire identity was about to split open in front of millions of people. The room had been calm just moments before, the audience expecting a normal discussion about generational conflict, maybe misunderstanding, maybe emotional distance, but definitely not this kind of revelation that grips the bones and makes the heart forget how to beat. The grandmother had been quiet throughout the show, hands folded, eyes lowered, voice soft when she spoke, and no one suspected that behind that gentle tone was the kind of storm that could drown an entire bloodline. The young woman spoke first, explaining how she always felt out of place in her own home, like her childhood didn't quite fit her, like her memories were too blurry even though they should have been clear, like there were fragments missing in places where laughter should have lived. She said she grew up feeling like she was a guest in her own life, someone occupying a role she didn't understand, like wearing clothes that didn't belong to her, walking through rooms that felt familiar but distant, and she could never describe the emptiness because she didn't know where it came from. She remembered moments like flickers, faces smiling but not reaching their eyes, hugs that felt careful instead of natural, conversations that always stayed just short of intimate. And every time she asked about her childhood, the answers were too neat, too polished, too rehearsed, like a story that had been practiced over and over until everyone forgot where the truth originally ended. She said she felt like her birthdays weren't celebrations, but reminders that time was passing without understanding who she truly was. And she would lie awake at night, wondering why she felt different, why her reflection didn't feel like hers, why sometimes she looked in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back. The audience listened, soft murmurs of sympathy filling the air, but they still didn't know what was coming. Dr. Phil leaned forward, his voice steady, encouraging her to continue, and the grandmother tightened her jaw like someone preparing for impact. The young woman described finding hidden papers one day by accident, documents that didn't match the story she was told, dates misaligned, signatures blurred, and a name she had never seen before listed under mother. She confronted her family, but they dismissed it, claimed it was an adoption process error, a clerical mistake, something not worth questioning, but her heart didn't believe it. Something inside her whispered that her life had been built on a foundation carefully arranged to hide something deeper. And then Dr. Phil turned to the grandmother. He didn't ask gently, he didn't cushion the question, he asked directly, plainly, with the weight of everything hanging in the air. What is the truth? The grandmother inhaled, slow and heavy, like someone who had been running for decades and finally accepted that there was nowhere left to go. Her voice shook not from fear, but from the release of holding something that long, and she said, "I am not her mother. I am her grandmother." The audience gasped like the air had been crushed out of the room. The young woman didn't blink at first because shock freezes the body before the heart catches up. Her eyes flickered slowly to the woman she had called Mom her entire life, not angry yet, not crying, just lost. The grandmother continued, words tumbling like a dam breaking, explaining how her own daughter had gotten pregnant too young, at a time when the family believed the world would tear them apart for the mistake. She explained how reputations mattered more than love back then, how people judged with knives in their eyes, how a teenage girl with a baby was seen as ruined instead of human, so they made a decision that felt like love, felt like protection, but was rooted in fear. They took the baby, registered her as their own, told the teenage daughter to pretend she was an older sister instead of a mother, told neighbors, relatives, schools, doctors, everyone that the child belonged to them, and the young woman had grown up believing a lie that was woven into every memory. The biological mother, who had lived her entire life as the aunt, had been sitting backstage watching, waiting for her moment to be allowed to speak, and when the doors opened and she stepped out, the young woman's entire body stiffened because seeing her was like seeing a ghost of herself, a mirror aged with regret. The studio lights softened, but nothing else softened. The biological mother's hands shook as she walked closer, but she didn't reach out because she knew she did not have the right to touch the child she once gave life to but wasn't allowed to claim. She whispered the young woman's name softly, carefully, like someone handling something sacred. The young woman's breathing quickened, confusion twisting into betrayal, betrayal twisting into grief, grief twisting into rage so sharp it couldn't fit into words. She asked why her life had been rewritten, why the truth had been buried, why love had been given only in shadows. The grandmother said she wanted to protect her. The biological mother said she wanted to keep her safe. But the young woman said she didn't feel protected. She felt stolen, and the room cracked open. The grandmother tried to explain how society had been cruel, how rumors could destroy lives, how she believed giving the baby a stable home would save her. The biological mother added that she watched every milestone from the sidelines, loving from a distance, pretending to be an aunt while her heart broke every time she saw her child run to another woman calling her mom. The young woman's voice rose, not loud but trembling with wounds that were just beginning to bleed. She said she spent her whole life searching for something she couldn't name, and now she finally understood what it was, herself. And just when everyone thought the worst of the truth had been revealed, just when the tension seemed at its peak, Dr. Phil asked one more question, a question that felt like it had been sitting in the shadows waiting its turn. Does she know who her father is? The grandmother's eyes closed. The biological mother's breath stopped. The young woman leaned forward, heart pounding so loud it felt like the only sound in the room, and the truth waiting behind. That question was heavier than everything said before. The grandmother didn't answer right away, and that silence said more than words ever could, because silence is where the truth hides when the truth is too painful to speak, and everyone in the studio felt the weight of that silence settle like dust on their skin. The young woman stared at her grandmother, waiting, breathing unevenly. Because this wasn't just about names or titles anymore. This was about the one missing piece of her identity, the one question that had lived in the deepest part of her chest her entire life. Part that woke her up at night without reason, the part that made her feel like she belonged nowhere. Dr. Phil leaned forward, but he didn't push. He didn't have to. The moment was already holding itself together by a thread. The grandmother finally opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the biological mother looked away, her face folding in on itself like someone remembering a nightmare they never truly woke up from. And that was when the young woman realized the answer wasn't simple, wasn't clean, wasn't something that could be contained in a single sentence. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Tell me, please," and the grandmother whispered, "You don't know him." But the young woman shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes though she refused to let them fall. Not yet, because she wasn't crying for loss, she was crying for truth, for identity, for reality. "Tell me who he is," she repeated, and her voice was no longer a question. It was a demand. The biological mother inhaled sharply and said his name, a name the young woman had never heard in her life, a name that didn't connect to any face in her memories, a name that meant everything and nothing at the same time. Biological mother explained that he was someone she loved when she was too young to understand love, someone who promised forever but disappeared when the pregnancy appeared, someone who left her standing alone with a future she wasn't ready for. The young woman listened, jaw trembling, because she had imagined her father countless times, maybe a hero, maybe lost, maybe broken, but she had never imagined him as a person who simply walked away. But then the biological mother said something that made the room shift in an entirely different direction. He didn't walk away because he didn't care. He walked away because he didn't know. The young woman froze, confusion striking through her chest like lightning. The biological mother explained that she never told him, never gave him the chance to choose because the family made the decision before he ever had a voice. The grandmother lowered her head, shoulders sinking under decades of guilt, admitting that they hid the pregnancy, hid the birth, hid the baby, hid the truth, and by the time she considered telling him, it was too late. The lie had already become the life they all lived. The audience murmured, but softly, like they understood the complexity of love mixed with fear, of protection mixed with possession, of sacrifice mixed with selfishness. The young woman asked the next question slowly, painfully, "Is he alive?" The biological mother nodded, and that single nod held a universe inside it. The young woman's breath hitched. "Does he know about me?" The biological mother shook her head. The grandmother closed her eyes, and the young woman's entire world shattered into 1,000 pieces that didn't fit anymore. She stood up, pacing, holding her own arms like she was trying to keep her body from falling apart, because realizing that your father exists not as a memory or a absence, but as a living, breathing human somewhere in the world, was reality too large to swallow all at once. She felt betrayed not just by lies, but by time itself, lost years she could never reclaim, birthdays where an empty chair sat at the table without anyone acknowledging who should have been sitting there. Dr. Phil gently guided her to sit again, his voice soft but firm, reminding her to breathe, reminding her that even identity can only break so fast before the heart can't bear it. The young woman asked, "Does he deserve to know?" And that question didn't belong to anyone but her, because this wasn't about punishment or forgiveness or blame now. It was about choice, her choice, the one thing she had been denied her entire life. The grandmother, tears finally falling, whispered, "I thought I was saving you. I thought I was giving you a better life. I didn't realize I was taking pieces of who you were." The young woman finally let the tears fall, but they weren't loud, they weren't explosive, they were quiet, steady, like something inside her had surrendered to the truth. The biological mother reached out, but stopped halfway, her hand trembling in the space between them, because love without permission is not love, it is longing. The young woman looked at her and asked the question that had been forming since the moment the truth came out. "Did you love me?" The biological mother's knees buckled, and she sank into the chair, sobbing, but not dramatically, not theatrically, sobbing like someone whose heart had been bleeding for decades behind a closed door. She said she loved her every day, loved her silently, loved her from the doorway, from the living room, from family gatherings where she pretended to be an aunt, but memorized every detail, every smile, every laugh, every tear, every scar. She loved her in ways that tore her apart because she could not claim what was hers. The young woman listened, tears blurring her vision, but understanding something she hadn't before. That love given in silence is still love, but it is a love that wounds the giver. The grandmother said she acted out of fear, fear of judgment, fear of shame, fear of losing control, fear of seeing her daughter crushed by the world, and so she tried to protect everyone, but in protecting them, she broke them. The young woman exhaled slowly, shaking, grieving not the truth itself but the years stolen by it. And then came the final question, the one that would decide not the past but the future. Dr. Phil asked her what she wanted to do now. Room held its breath, the grandmother held her hand to her chest. The biological mother sat very still, afraid to hope but unable to stop herself. The young woman wiped her tears, not to hide them, but to see clearly, because this was the first moment of her life she was choosing for herself. She said, voice steady though fragile, "I want to meet him. But I want to do it on my terms, not as someone's secret, not as someone's mistake, as myself." The grandmother cried openly now, grief and love mixing into something raw and human. The biological mother nodded, whispering, "I'll stand with you if you let me." And the young woman didn't answer with words, but she didn't pull away either. And sometimes not pulling away is the beginning of healing. The camera pulled back slowly, capturing not a dramatic ending, not a perfect resolution, but the beginning of something new, something uncertain, something honest. Because sometimes the truth doesn't break a family. Sometimes it finally gives them a chance to become one.